Well, last week I preached a little bit about the future of the church. If you weren't here or having this amazing weekend at an amazing place, let me give you a quick recap. We actually looked at a video last week that seemed to muck up everything for the people online. I really appreciate those who connect with us online, whether it's live or later. So we do apologise for last week. But we looked at a bluer video where Jack's dad was on his way to pick up his son from his school when his GPS ran out of batteries. And Jack's dad realised he had no idea how to get there. Without the GPS, he felt completely lost. And we wondered last week whether some churches are feeling a little bit similar at the moment. As people change, as society changes, as the world changes, we're starting to notice that some of the ideas and outreach activities and programs that have worked so successfully for the last 70 years aren't quite as effective anymore. It's like the mission GPS that has served us so well has stopped, and now we're a little bit lost of what to do next. How do we continue to be a church that is spiritually helpful, effective and sustainable when things just keep changing around us? I suggested last week that because of this, the worldwide church, but particularly the Western church, is feeling a little bit disorientated at the moment. Not sure which way is forward. Here at Turramurra Uniting, we really wanted to wrestle with some of these questions and have some honest conversations about what God might be saying to us. And so with some prayerful discernment, we've been pondering, what does it mean as we move towards 2030? What is God calling us to do? And last year, in June actually, which seems ages ago, Church Council backed an idea called Future Directions, which unfortunately the New South Wales Synod of the Uniting Church chose the exact same name. Actually, they would argue they chose it first, but we chose them independently, if you're wondering if we're copying off each other. A process of prayer and strategic thinking and ultimately mission planning where we would put everything on the table and hear God's leading and guidance for us as a church. And we invited Dave Cornford to help us in that process. Thanks, Dave. And so towards the back end of last year, Dave and his other friend Dave, which is a little confusing, so it's just Dave and Dave from now on, they gathered some people together, a couple of small groups together, and shared with us a framework that might be helpful for us as we move through this process of, where is God leading us as we head towards 2030? And this is the model that Dave and Dave gave us, the scope, the generate and the build. And in very simple terms, what they were encouraging us to do is to take a step back and to look at the larger picture or wrestle with some of the questions that are just slightly beyond us. Often in mission planning, we want to rush to solutions. Let's get to the generate the ideas and build. That's what we want to do. Where's the concrete solutions here? But what they were encouraged us to do is to spend some more time in that scope area, just allowing space for God to speak to us and to wrestle with the questions. And the thing that they encouraged us the most, which I found a really intriguing idea, is they asked us, what are the questions that we need to ask of ourselves if we're looking to move forward? What are the critical challenges that might impact our future? What are the important things that we need to notice or address if we're moving forward? It's when we start to work out these sort of bigger ideas that we can move on to the other steps of generating, what will we do about this? Or what some ideas, and how do we bring those ideas to life and build God's kingdom? Around the same time, Ian, our Church Council chairperson, also shared with me another model that I found helpful in all of this. It was called the double diamond. And the double diamond idea is that whenever you're trying to wrestle with some really big, difficult or complex issues, one of the things that you can do, it's not dissimilar to the scope, build generate build idea is to first ask what are the challenges, what are the questions, what are the issues that we need to face, but go really wide. Put everything on the table here. It doesn't matter, if we get 100 different questions, what are the questions that are going through people's minds? Talk to people, do our research, invite conversations, listen to as many diverse voices as possible. But then the reality is we can't possibly talk about 100 questions. So then how do we narrow it back down again? How do we actually start to discern which is the most critical questions or the most important challenges or issues to address? Then we can, once we narrow it down, move into the innovative area of brainstorming or coming up with creative solutions again to encourage us, once again, to go wide. That's where we have the church-wide meetings. That's where we have the brainstorming and where we sort of see, well, what ideas are out there? Once again, go wide. See how many things come out of that. But we can't possibly do all of those things. So then once again, how do we narrow it back down again? How do we start to see which of these things will be the most helpful as we're moving forward? Not to say that we can't try more later on, but we certainly need to work out what is the most effective things that we can be doing. Is that sort of making sense so far? That's important because when I go on, I keep referring back to these two models. I found them both helpful as we strive to look forward to what does it mean for us to be a church in, say, 2030. I just want to pause here and say another picture that I was given. It was actually in one of Dave and Dave's sessions. They gave us a whole stack of Post-it notes, and we were called to write, the issues or the things that are going through our mind or the questions and stick them up on the board. And there was a whiteboard full of Post-it notes, and I was reading through it, and then I just sat down and started to reflect a little bit on this. And I started to doodle. Now, I don't doodle very much, but this is what I was drawing. Here is the actual the Post-it note. I kept it. I didn't stick it on the board. As this whiteboard kept filling up more and more, I began to just draw circles. And I began to think, here at Turramurra Church, we do a model of church really, really well. But if I'm honest, it's probably a 2000 church model. Or if we want to even push back, maybe late 1990s, early 2000s model. Steve Everest, who was here at the time, did a lot of work with the church in sort of going, what does it mean for us to be a church that is relevant in the place where we are now? And there were some changes made in the way that we do church. And I've got to say, it was pretty successful. It connected well with people and the community, and it worked well. And we still do that model really well. But the question is that still the right model as we move towards 2030? Or do we have to do that again and say, what's a model of church or ministry or mission that might work well as we move towards 2030 in the situation that we find ourselves now? So I was sort of thinking that and drawing a circle. Then I started to draw another circle around that, and I sort of said, well, the United Church has got a goal of growth. They're calling us to focus on growth. But what does growth mean here at Tuck? What are we doing which is helpful for spiritual growth? What about people's personal growth or their emotional growth or the growth in the sense of community? What does that mean for us? And I drew another circle and then another circle. What does it mean for us to be a lighthouse church? We feel this calling that God is calling us to be bigger than just us here. And so what does it mean for us to be a lighthouse church that looks beyond us? Are we just focused on those connected in the church family here, or I believe we're also interested in those who are beyond us? But what does that mean for, say, other uniting churches? Where does St Andrews fit into this? How do we find the right balance between the resources we spend supporting the church here and supporting the people beyond us. And then, speaking of resources, I started to draw another circle and started to go, well, how do we make sure our church continues to be sustainable and viable into the future? Amid a continuing cost of living crisis and changing understanding in volunteerism, it's harder and harder to find the resources we need to do ministry and mission. So how do we start to be creative and make sure that we're still doing the things that are important and critical with the resources that we have at hand? How can we be creative in finding the resources that we need maybe to do the other ideas that come forward? Or how do we balance things out? I looked down at all these circles and started to wonder, just addressing one of these things is a big ask. How do we even begin to address all of these as we move forward? The image that came to mind, and then I started to draw a little bit more specifically, was that of the NASA gyroscope. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It's this thing here. NASA has a part of the astronaut training where they strap astronauts into what they call a 3-axis gyroscope. The astronauts say they hate this because what happens is that you get strapped in this thing and then they spin you on 3 different axes. And in that, you have to try and work out which way's forward. And they say it's almost impossible. Even more, they give you boosters that you have to sort of like then negotiate how you can get back straight again. It's if you were in a spacecraft spinning through space, you have to work out which way's forward and rebalance yourself. But they say it's really impossible because things are spinning in different directions. That's how I was feeling sitting in Dave and Dave's session. There was too many things that were spinning. There was too many things that were throwing me in different directions. How can you possibly work out which is our way forward, which is the way that God is leading us, when there's too many axes that we're getting asked to make? What's our thoughts on? How do we move through this? How do we understand this? It just seemed to be very dislocating. Can you relate to this? Dave and Dave had to pause their conversation because January came around, and let's be honest, December is all about Christmas and January is all about nothing. And so we paused that conversation. We're coming back to that. But I don't know, I had space to keep on thinking. And something sort of clicked when I was up at Hervey Bay. Call it divine inspiration if you want, but maybe it was just because I had more time to think. I was thinking about this gyroscope and I realised that the same technology used in a gyroscope is actually the same technology that's used in a gimbal. Do you know what a gimbal is? A gimbal is one of these things, yes, and I've got one here that I'm going to see if I can get working so I can actually show you what it looks like. It's a camera stabiliser. It also works on 3 axes, and if I turn this on here, this is what was bipping in church before, if you were wondering. It still has the 3 axes, but the difference is that it says, I want to keep in focus what's ever in the middle. So instead of the thing in the middle being spun around, when everything moves, oops, it just thought I was trying to turn the camera sideways, it then adapts the camera to keep it steady. Does that make sense? Do you like that? Was it worth the money I spent on the gimbal just to use in a sermon illustration? My money, not the church's, Rob's. It's okay. Oh, no, I just turned the thing off and now it's going crazy. But I really liked that idea, that it got me thinking, we could see these circles, the things that are spinning us around, either as something that is throwing us or dislocating us or making us not sure what's going on. Or we can go, you know what? What is the thing in the core that we want to keep stable? What is the thing in the core that we want to keep important? So that when everything else is spinning around us, which it is, we keep this as our focus. Is that making sense? It really meant a lot to me when I was working through this. It's the same technology, just different sides of the coin. So what are the things in the middle that we want to keep stable in the midst of everything else changing? Or specifically here at Tuck, what are the things that we value so much that we would put in the core, that we're going to make sure that even with other stuff changing around us, we're going to adapt so that this thing keeps the focus? What would those things be? What would you put in the core? Oh, come on, there's one obvious answer, isn't there? Let's put Jesus in the core to start with. Yes, of course Jesus has to be in the core. We're about helping people know Jesus and grow in Jesus. Jesus is the core and the foundation of all that we do. So yes, let's put Jesus there. What else would we put in the core? And this is where it starts to become interesting. And I think this is what we need to work out as we move forward. Sure, we've tried this before and we've said things like, caring, being a caring community, our sense of belonging, our heart that we have for children, youth and young adults, connecting and caring for our seniors, our desire to make a difference in the world. All of these things we would argue, was in the core as well. But I think we need to also be a little bit broader than that, which is why I chose this reading from 1 Corinthians 13. Trevor said, I'm interested to see how you tie these things in. Here's what I'm doing, Trevor. All right, in this beautiful, well-known passage, Paul highlights the eternal nature of love. But in verse 8, Paul acknowledges that things change. He says, prophecies will cease, tongues will be stilled, knowledge will pass away. Things change. In verse 11, Paul admits that he also changes. He says he once thought like a child, reasoned like a child, but now he thinks and reasons differently. So he's saying things are changing, he is changing. So what does it mean to try and work out what's next? I actually like the imagery in 1 Corinthians 13 where it says, it's almost like we're looking into a mirror. We can't see things completely clearly at this point. It's hard to do because things keep changing around us. It's hard to have that certainty. And yet Paul goes on to say, well, actually there is something I am certain of, something that doesn't change, something that's in the middle of the gimbal. What is it? Well, actually it's three things: faith, hope and love, but the greatest of these is love. Can you see what Paul's trying to do? We can be certain of those things because it's in the core, it's in the centre. So maybe when we're talking about what is going to be in the middle of our gimbal, what will it be? It will be things like love as well. And maybe, I really like John's kids talk before because it was great for my point. When we get these things right in the middle, then everything else sort of makes sense around it. Even though it's spinning, even though all this stuff is changing around us. Because Paul says, if love isn't the core, then it makes sense. If love is not there, then it's a clanging gong or a banging cymbal, or it's not working right. So we've got to get the core right so that everything else as it spins around, we can seem to adapt with better. So where do we go from here? It's supposed to be Mission Sunday. We're supposed to be talking about what we're doing in 2025. If you've come hoping for some concrete solutions, sorry, it's not the year for that. We're not quite there. We feel that this is a year that we are setting aside, not to stop our mission and ministry, that's going to continue on. But if you want to know what we're sort of continuing on in that terms, have a look at last year's Vision Sunday stuff and the stuff that we did in the middle of the year. We will continue to do that. But we want to invite you this morning to join us on a journey as we start to work out what does it mean, what is God leading us towards as we head towards 2030. Now, we do have our fancy brochure here, and you've probably all read this by now, because if I give you something to read before a sermon, you read it before the sermon or during the sermon. But this is sort of shows you the plan that Church Council and the ministry team and people like Dave and Dave have been helping us put together as we head into this year. And I very quickly just want to step through this, even though you've probably already read it already. So that part of the sermon was all there. If you open it up there, you will see where it's flowing. Stage 1 is in this period in the lead up to Easter. And if you're wondering how this sort of fits in, it sort of fits in where that red bar is on the screen. This is not in the brochure. Sort of fits in that first stage of the Dave and Dave model or the double diamond model. So you can sort of see how the models sort of fit in here as well. But in this first stage, we are in the lead up to Easter. Dave and Dave has been encouraging us to put everything on the table and explore the scope of what is before us. And as I said before, the double diamond is encouraging us to sort of take that step back and to identify the questions or the critical issues or challenges that might impact us moving forward. And from the conversations that we've been having so far, because there has been some conversations within, in the preparation for this, we have already been throwing up a whole stack of questions. Do you want to know where the questions are? If you fold it back the right way and open up that way, you will see some of the questions that are being thrown around already. Now, as I said, we have been writing down everything. But this is a list that is not complete yet because we haven't heard your voice. Well, we've probably heard some of your voices, but not everybody's voices yet. Does that make sense? So we're inviting you in the lead up to Easter to be part of this process as well, to maybe join some of the conversations about, well, what are the critical questions? What are the important issues? What do we need to wrestle with as we move towards 2030? You can either do that in the small groups or you can do it right now. Well, not literally right now because I'm speaking, but there's a QR code there that you can scan and it will take you to a online thing where you can write as much as you want in that first question. I don't think I've put a limit on how much you can write there. Or if you're a person who goes, I don't even know where to start, I've listed all of those things there and you can say, yeah, I like that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. I've limited it to 10 because if you tick every one, that's not actually helpful. I'm actually interested for you to actually say, here are 10 that resonate with me. Is that making sense? And we're really keen to hear some of your feedback, some of your ideas as well. But that's only half the job because at some point we have to do some narrowing down. If we've gone wide with the diamond, we've got to narrow it back again. And so towards Easter, we're actually going to be going through some of the processes of how do we actually identify what are the most critical questions or the most important issues to wrestle with. And we're going to try and get that down to 5. Not to say that the other questions or issues are not important. They probably are. But we need to start with 5. And these 5, we want to sort of say, what is the 5 that is most important for us to wrestle with now as we move towards 2030? I have a feeling that some of these will not be little issues either. They might be those big issues that I was talking about before. Hopefully by Easter, we as a church community will have some consensus on this, which leads us to stage 2. Stage 2 will happen in May and June and will be more of the mission planning process that maybe that you've seen through this church before, where we take these issues and particularly the 5 that we've identified and through research, brainstorming and prayerful discernment, we'll see what innovative and creative ideas or solutions come up. We will be pushing the diamond wide here again and writing down everything. But I do have a feeling, as I said before, I don't believe we'll just be tinkering at the edges here. I don't think this will be a bit like, maybe we can, just tweak this a bit. I think this is the year, the opportunity where we can actually really wrestle with, stuff as radical as what's a new model of church moving into the future. That's not only going to connect with the people who are in the building right now, but the people who aren't. What does that mean for us? As I talked about last year, maybe we might need to say if God is doing a new thing, what are the new wineskins that we need to build so that God can do the new thing here? Which is both exciting and, as we talked about last week, a little unsettling as well. At the same time, I also think that we might need to do some honest conversations about, sustainability and fruitfulness. I think it's one of the real challenges of the church moving forward. How do we make sure that we are sustainable? How do we make sure that we are continuing to function effectively in the work that God is calling us to do? Not now, but also in 5 years, 10 years' time. What does it mean for us to be a sustainable church? I've needed to choose a reading from Luke because we've done every reading from Luke up to now, but I had to skip ahead to Luke 13 to find a parable about where Jesus was talking about this. That parable of the fig tree. Jesus is saying, look, it's important to not only invest in things that are important, but to also look at how the outcome is. And so when the gardener's got us saying, well, this fig tree is not producing any figs, the question then is, well, what do we do about it? Now, I'm not saying we blindly go in and throw out anything that we think is unfruitful. Maybe we have to do what the other gardener did and said, look, let's, try and change things around to see if we can make this fruitful. Or maybe there might have to be a place where we go, you know what? That era for that tree is drawing to an end, and we need to find other ways, because we need to be effective in the work that God is calling us to do. So part of this process in term 2 was not only just be adding more and more ideas to the church, but also to do some, as I said, assessment on how we can be most fruitful and effective in the work that God is calling us to do. I'm imagining in stage 2 we're going to come up with loads and loads and loads of ideas, but once again we need to narrow back down the diamond again to what is going to be, 5, I don't know if it's going to be 5 ultimately. What are the things that we're going to try as we move forward to 2030? I hope that they're realistic and sustainable and innovative ideas that we can be putting into practice, which leads us to the third stage, that in August and September we will hope to run the third of the Imagining Hope programs called Growing Generosity. This program will not only cast a clearer picture of what it might mean to be a 2030 church, but also how we can resource this vision. The first two Imagining Hope programs, Imagining Hope and Gifts of God, were hugely instrumental in driving our church forward. Both of those had a big impact in what we were doing and how we were moving forward. And I'm hoping and praying that this third of the three Imagining Hope programs will be just as significant. How are we sounding here? I know that it's been largely conceptual rather than concrete this morning, but I am excited by this sort of a model. I think that this year is going to be an important year for our church. To be honest, it's not that dissimilar to what Evolve went through 18 months ago when it was trying to wrestle with how do we make night church something which is helpful for young adults. When we entered into that as Evolve, we couldn't quite see what the end answer was going to be. But we entered into a process together trying to work that out. And there's been blessings that have come from that hard work. In a sense, whilst I'm excited about this year, as a strategic person, this year is frustrating me a little bit too. Because as much as I like to try and scenario-wise out and imagine where the end point's going to lead us to be, I can't do that yet. We're too early on that journey. I can't pick it where we're going to end yet. And actually, I think that's the point. I think God is inviting us to head on this journey. I can see bits of it like the dull mirror, but I can't see it clearly, not completely. And as I said, I guess that's the point. God is inviting all of us to be on this journey this year of discernment and of mission planning. And whilst we're not sure where we might end up, that's okay too. That's okay because, we are trusting in God to lead us. We're trusting in Jesus to walk beside us. We are trusting in the Holy Spirit to inspire us on the way. And whilst it might feel there is too many things spinning around us Work out where all the circles fit in now into the fancy brochure. We need to hold on to the important things in the core. Things like Jesus and love, and make sure that we place them at the centre of our lives and the centre of our church. And remember what I said at the end of last week too. God wants to be helpful for us. God has sent Jesus to help us in this process. God wants the best for us. So let's see where this journey might take us. Amen.